Superb. Thank you. Right. Morning, everyone. So thank you for welcoming me back again to the COEO conference. It's good to be up here talking to you and giving you an overview and sort of following up on what we saw last year around sort of the trends within the data. So I stood up here last year and we sort of talked about some of the conflicts that have been going on. So there'd been quite a lot of negativity in the news. There'd been sort of some headline figures that the underlying data wasn't necessarily backing up. So we kind of stood here, talked a little bit around the underlying data, talked about some of the differences we could see, and actually was it being a bit contradictory? Were consumers finding it as tough as we potentially sort of felt coming out of the news, etc.? And then we spoke a bit about sort of the data and how data can be used in collections to help people actually when they are sort of in the position, how you can know more about your clients. So that was kind of the starting point. So the idea of the session today, start you off, is to follow up a bit from what I spoke about last year. So first of all, talk a little bit about some of the headlines that are still going on at the moment, some of the key trends, some of the challenges that you can see out there. We'll then go into more detail around some of the trends and how they've evolved since last year, from originations through to collections performance, looking particularly at the mortgage market and the credit card market. And then actually talk a little bit more about the data, but deep diving into a couple of specific areas, into actually, if you are using data and you know how to use it, what difference can it make to your potential performance? So that's kind of what we're going to focus on today. So that's where we're going to go. So as is often the case at the moment, when you look at the headlines, certain bits of information sort of jump out at you. Very often, though, it's what's sitting behind them that is still impacting potentially what is going on. So when you look at the back end of last year and the start of this year, you know, we're sort of 2 years beyond really the sort of start of the recovery from COVID, so things are moving along. But then, somewhat unexpectedly, you know, the economy kind of shrank at the back end of last year. So what impacts that had on people? You know, even yesterday during the Chancellor's budget, if you look at the growth the country is facing, it's not exactly exceptional. You know, it's going to grow a little bit this year and then a little bit the year after. And I think there's a stat that something like every Chancellor for about the past 30 years has got their predictions wrong. So, you know, it may still shrink again, it may grow again, it could go either way. So you kind of look at the challenges consumers are potentially facing there. But inflation has been easing, and that was obviously a big one. When you look at sort of last year, one of the main challenges was the fact that people were suffering from inflation, from prices rising. So how were they sort of managing, how were they coping with that? You know, there's an interesting one, though, that by December, consumer confidence was starting to sort of get a bit better. People were generally feeling a little bit better about lives. And again, if you look at Christmas, sort of Christmas saw some good spend patterns going on. I don't know if anyone, even this week, has tried booking anything for Mother's Day on Sunday. I did a bit of research the other day, and I phoned 6 pubs, and none of them are taking any bookings at all, because they're completely booked out. So, yes, there are challenges, but yeah, people are still going out. People are still doing things out there. And when you kind of look at the headline of the energy prices rising, and energy's been going up, and it's awful, well, actually, during the course of last year, energy prices did actually decline. Then they went up a bit towards the end of the year. But if you look forward again, from the start of April, energy prices are due to come down about 14%. They're due to have their biggest drop. Now, as the year progresses, they may go up again. And again, people feel that sort of quite a lot. So the headline is you still kind of look at it and you still think to yourself, there's still challenges. You know, the inflation is still higher than it should be. The economy is not performing as people want. People are still paying more for their energy, but less than they were. You know, people, though, are still generally feeling okay. There's an interesting one from a debt collection point of view, which kind of feeds into the review, actually, you just had read, that one of the little bits of work we did do, speaking to customers, was understanding how people feel about being chased for debt. Funnily enough, they weren't big fans of it. It sort of comes out that people being chased don't like being contacted massively, which is quite an interesting one. But underlying all of this, and it's perhaps the box in the middle, which is the key one, when you look at all of the data and the challenges the company have had, and you look at the trends that are going on, the bit that seems to kind of come together is you hear, yeah, unemployment's rising. Well, it might be, but also at the same time, that's the key thing. There are still almost 1 million jobs being advertised. So whilst unemployment's gone up a little bit, hasn't gone up a huge amount, there's still a lot of jobs being advertised. There's still a lot of vacancies. And underlying a lot of the data that we can see, and a lot of the trends that we can see, is the belief that actually people have kept working. So whilst their incomes are squeezed, whilst people have found life harder at the moment, they're not out of work. They're not paying for things. Some of the evidence points to the fact that people are switching deals faster. You get to the end of your Sky deal, and instead of waiting 3 months, people are on it. They're changing much quicker. They're trying to look at ways of saving money. So it's more about tweaking lifestyle rather than actually getting into arrears. And that's sort of some of the headline bits that we sort of see sitting behind it. And when you then put it in the wider context as well, the left-hand chart, this is all about bank losses over each quarter from the 90s, basically. And this massive spike here, that's the credit crunch going on there. And you can see what the bank losses did there. We're sort of down here. So over the past couple of years, yes, there has been a bit of an increase. But in the context, historically, it's nowhere near what it has been before. Now, part of that is likely down to FCA regulation, better affordability checks, companies taking on customers that actually can afford to pay even when they start to struggle a bit. So actually, in the wider context, yeah, there has been a downturn in the economy, and yes, things have been more challenging, but the amount of debt being generated, the amount of payments being missed, the amount of arrears that banks are actually writing off is historically kind of in line where you'd expect it to be. And when you look at the headlines around insolvency, which is this graph here, when you sort of look at insolvencies overall, there was a bit of a headline last year about, there had been a big increase around insolvency, except the headline itself was focused on debt relief orders, on DROs, and how they had increased. Actually, overall personal insolvencies fell from October 22 to October 23. Because the number of IVAs had dropped significantly. It dropped around about sort of 40%. So IVAs were massively decreasing, whilst DROs have been increasing. Bankruptcies are also decreasing. So basically what's happening is more people are shifting into the world of DROs rather than sort of the IVA world. So actually overall, personal insolvencies fell. I think an interesting one to keep an eye on, and what you can see right over here, if you can just see this very end of this graph, is now the gap between DROs and IVAs is actually very small. And I don't think it's going to be that long until DROs potentially overtake IVAs in actually the amount of insolvencies you've got, especially when yesterday the Chancellor announced now that DROs, they're changing the debt limits up to £50,000. They're also changing things like if you want to have a vehicle not to be included, they're changing the value from 2 to 4 grand as well. So effectively, DROs are becoming easier to get hold of. There's no fees either being applied to them anymore. So more and more people are kind of going down that route of actually lower value debts, less assets, right, let's go down the DRO route rather than full bankruptcy or even IVAs. So again, that overarching piece of insolvencies, generally are relatively low compared to where they've been historically. So it doesn't mean those people that are going through them are not impacted. Clearly they are. But again, when you look at the headlines, the story, and increase in insolvencies, well, no, there wasn't. There was an increase in DROs, but overall personal insolvencies fell. And then the piece that kind of shrouds all of this and all of our discussions today and everything we talk about, of course, is this year there's going to be an election. So whether that's early this year or late in the year, it's the latest of January next year. Okay, but fundamentally, when you look at the polls up at the top, Labour have been out front for a long time. And it seems to be kind of no matter what the government do, that is not changing. So there's quite a, I think most people can sit here and go, yeah, there's a pretty strong chance there's going to be a change in government this year. It's just potentially the formation of how many seats they get versus how many the other parties get. And that is against a backdrop of these two charts at the bottom. When you start to look at sort of real terms income, and this did get mentioned yesterday, fundamentally people's real incomes have not changed since sort of 2006. So people are still effectively feeling they're earning the same as they were. There was actually a dip here around sort of 2012, 2013. People's incomes actually were going down, which is unheard of. For years, you would expect to be better off than your parents and your kids better off than you. As a country, that seems to have changed at the moment. We all seem to be going, it's great, we're just not worse off. Is that right? Maybe we should be, starting to actually have higher expectations of actually, we should be better off. And when you look at sort of the cost of living, these charts down here, and you start to look at sort of food and energy costs, they have substantially increased since 2021. So you're sort of talking about sort of £200 more. It's some big numbers going on. So when you start to put together the fact that overall, the economy is relatively flat, people are generally feeling a bit worse off. There's going to be, an election which could impact policy and what companies are going to see coming out this year. It kind of creates this view that, things are, at the moment, it's not a brilliant place, but also as the insolvencies show, it's not disastrous. We're not seeing trends spiking, going in completely the wrong direction. So that kind of is the starting point and gives you a bit of a frame as to some of the data and what we can actually see. Because, so we said last year, when we looked at the underlying information, it was a bit contradictory. Last year had been a lot more doom and gloom, but the data just wasn't backing it up. Okay, so what's happened over the past year? What have we seen? Are there significant changes? Are there challenges? Are we seeing big spikes? So as a starting point, this is the one that probably sums everything I'm going to talk about up. So if you pay attention to this and then want to have a doze, feel free, because this sort of summarizes everything that I talk about. So this is looking at arrears. So you've got 1 payment's down, 2 payment down, and then you've got arrangements in blue, and then this grey line is total accounts, because all of this comes together to kind of frame what we're looking at. So fundamentally, if you look over the past year, yes, there has been an increase in arrears. Okay, so that's the headline figure. Yeah, there has been. However, not dramatically so. Okay, so yes, there is an increase. You can see 1 payment's down and 2 payments down. But the interesting part, and part of the debate we now have when we talk to clients as well, is, okay, yeah, it's high, but it's only kind of back to where it was pre-pandemic levels. And that is one of the key things we hear chatting to clients is, yes, arrears are going up, but they're not well beyond what we've seen before. They're only kind of going back to previous areas. Now, so then you then get into a debate of going, should we be comparing to pre-pandemic or not? Because actually, if you take it from 2 years ago, then yes, there has been a constant increase in arrears over the past 2 years. But the slight challenge of that is 2 years ago, the pandemic had created a false low. Because going into the pandemic, you can see there was a massive drop across all arrears. So you kind of have to recognize the pandemic impacted arrears, how companies behaved, and how the data was being recorded as well. So you kind of had this slightly false narrative. So you can look at it and you can go, yeah, actually, for the past couple of years, there is a sustained increase in early stage arrears and kind of in arrangements. Fine, if you take it as a standalone. But actually, I'll go back to, but it's not to like record high levels. It's going back to where it was, and it's kind of just matching pre-pandemic levels. So you're starting to potentially get new highs. So in a year, if that's sort of up here somewhere, then fine, things are really taking a downward turn. But will they do that? The graph tends to be a bit lumpy, sort of goes up and down a bit. And the other part underlying all of that, this grey line, this is total number of accounts. So again, they're increasing as well. Over the past few years, they've gone from sort of 260 million to 300 million, so a significant increase. In other words, credit's still being taken out. So we've actually got an increase in overall credit accounts being taken out, an increase in arrears, and a slight increase in arrangements. But you can kind of sit there and look at that and go, yeah, do you know, overall, it's not too bad. Yes, there are increases, but yes, there's also more credit. So that's that framing piece, which is, your headline figure that you'll probably hear a lot, particularly in the press, is there's been a big increase in arrears from 22 to 23 or over the past couple of years, which is true. Absolutely, on its own, there has been. But that's coming from a particularly low base. And that's the key thing to take into all of this and kind of look at it and go, okay, there are some challenges, but they're not into territory that we haven't seen before. And that's perhaps the key thing. So that's why keep an eye on it over the next 6, 12, 18 months and see what it does. Because I think there is a potential that it could go down that route, and it could go into uncharted territory of new arrears appearing everywhere. But who knows? That's what we've all got to try and figure out, and that's what economists sit and tell people as to what they think is going to happen. So you then start to think about that piece around, okay, so if arrears are going up, is there still appetite for credit at the moment? What's happening across the different markets? What's going on with originations, the point of credit applications? And you've got 3 different areas you can see here. So down in the bottom corner, you've got mortgage originations. Not massively surprisingly, they dropped quite a bit over the past couple of years, and that really comes down to interest rates. People kind of holding fire, waiting for interest rates to settle, waiting for loans to get cheaper. So actually, mortgage, the mortgage market does still keep ticking along. It's sort of, there's a few interesting trends that we'll touch on in a minute within the mortgage market that we can see, but that originations piece, yeah, that market has slowed. But if you look at the credit card market up at the top, that's actually still remaining relatively buoyant. And actually, you've had an increase, and they're now maintaining the higher level. The other thing about the credit card piece as well is that the average limit going out on new loans is about £4,000. So it's not a small limit that's being done. So actually, there very much is still an appetite for credit card applications. And that's against the backdrop of competition from buy now, pay later companies as well, who are deliberately targeting the credit card market. That's who they're going after. So there's that market looks quite good. And then the retail market down here at the bottom, which is that kind of retail finance market, actually that's kind of following. There's been a bit of a drop-off, but they've really been competing against buy now, pay later markets. But again, what you can really see in there is those big Christmas trends. Now again, that sort of Christmas 21 was a little bit of a false narrative because a lot of people were still staying at home a lot more. They weren't going to the shops quite as much. So that sector did incredibly well. But even since then, you still had your Christmas peaks coming through. And you can see the back end of last year, the Christmas peaks are coming through. So there's a fairly consistent pattern, which is, yes, retail have seen a slight drop overall when you look at the trend over a sustained period of time. But again, that's going from pandemic, which was a little bit of a false narrative, through to where we are now. Mortgages have seen a bit of a drop-off, not surprising with the way the market has been with interest rates going up. And then your credit card side actually is remaining relatively flat, so access to unsecured credit has continued. So the crux that all comes together is actually people do still want access to credit. They do still want to get hold of it. So that's what they're trying to do. People are still applying. Now, is that to manage cost of living pressures? Is that because they've actually got more money and they want to go and spend it? Again, that's each people's individual circumstances. But the overarching trend is, when you look at it, is it kind of fits with some markets are doing okay, others less so. Okay, so that's your kind of focus around the originations piece. So what we then wanted to do was have a little bit of a thought around mortgages. Okay, so mortgages are always a really interesting market, because the key thing, obviously, with mortgages is, generally speaking, it's the very last thing people want to stop paying. Okay, it's your house, it's where you live, it's the thing you will really hold on to, because generally it's the biggest asset we all have as well. One small thing that we haven't gotten any of these graphs, but we have seen in the data that we'll touch on, there is one trend in the mortgage arrears market which is really interesting that we've seen, which is if you look at new originations from the start of 2023, they have shown they are happier to fall into arrears earlier than any other group. Now, they don't go beyond one payment down, but it shows with banks offering forbearance and schemes allowing people to switch to interest only, etc., there's been a slight reprioritization for new homeowners in the debt, which is an interesting one. And that's, again, we're going to keep an eye on that trend, because it hasn't got huge implications because it's only one payment down and then it kind of levels itself off. But it's just interesting that particularly people early in having a mortgage have shown they're less fussed about getting sort of more into the arrears space. What you have got in the mortgage side is over here. So this is your arrears rates. This is your ones downs, twos down, and three downs. And again, on each of them, you can see there's a bit of an upward trend, okay? So there has been a bit of a sustained increase. So there were some stats out yesterday which again shows that repossessions are not at an all-time high. Repossessions are about in line of where they have been historically. And these arrears kind of show that. You're just starting to get into slightly higher territory than before, okay? So if you go back to pre-pandemic levels, it's just starting to get up to that level now where it's going to overtake it fairly soon. But it's fairly slow. Okay, it's fairly gradual, and the three down is a little bit flatter than the other ones. Okay, so you've got more people missing one payment, middle group at two, and then a slightly fewer down at sort of three. But again, what you can see is the gap here is sort of bigger effectively than the gap there. So actually, whilst the curve up for those on three down isn't quite as marked as your one down, the gap to where it's been historically is bigger. So that's an interesting little trend to sort of keep an eye on. And that also shows itself down here. So this is what we call our roll rates down here. So the roll rates are people going from 1 to 2 payments, 2 to 3 payments, 3 to 4 payments in arrears. And what you can see at this end of the graph, hopefully, as I try and keep out of the way of it, is that is widening. So if you look at it from here to here, the gap has widened. So what that means, people who are getting into later stage arrears are now finding it harder to recover from. So historically, you could go 2, 3, 4 payments down and get back up again. Those people now going 2 to 3 are then finding it harder to recover. And the gap, those going 1 to 2, is remaining relatively flat, to be honest. So people who are 1 payment in arrears, those rolling to 2, less of them do it. Okay, so just again, a tiny bit of context around this. Every month, we see roughly about 1.1 million people miss a payment in the UK that comes through and gets recorded to the bureaus. Of that stat, only 40% of them will roll to a status 2. So 60% stay at status 1 or roll back up to a status 0. And that's been the case for a long time. That hasn't changed. There's been no significant trends in that. And that kind of shows here. Those people that are going 1 to 2, less of them do it. But by the time you get 2 to 3 and 3 to 4, you're starting to get a bigger deviation. So that's the one to keep an eye on, which is if people are getting into arrears on their mortgage, once they get further down the arrears, then they are finding it harder to recover. So by the time you get more than sort of 2 payments in arrears, the flag should be bigger. Where sort of some people are starting to find it much harder to manage. When we look at the arrangements rates sitting in mortgages, again, the arrangement rates sort of relatively flat. So that's those people getting into arrears, coming up to an arrangement, reporting it back into the bureau. And again, you can kind of see there's various bits come into play around consumer duty, for example, and supporting customers. And there has been, since early 23, a bit of an increase there going up. But again, not significant, okay? So you can look at it and again, take it in the context that yes, mortgage arrears have increased a bit. And that's against a backdrop of significantly increasing interest rates. That's against a backdrop that people have had to try and look to go interest only, for example, or look at extending their term. But ultimately, it's helping to kind of keep arrears generally in check. However, those people falling further into arrears are then struggling to come back out of arrears again. And that's probably the one sort of main takeaway from it. These were then some of the other bits that sit behind it that we thought were some quite interesting stats. And this again came out in a report yesterday. This was highlighted. So this is now the term people are taking mortgages out for. And what you can see here is there's been a significant growth in the 30 to 35 term and the 35 plus term. So they are moving up significantly. So people now buying houses are naturally starting to take mortgages out for longer. And there was a query just recently coming out about, is this sustainable? People taking out 35-year mortgages at the age of 30 or 35. Is that actually sustainable? Because they're going to be well into retirement. And I think the one that actually really, I had to double check this, that's the stat that surprised me the most. And that's genuine. That's 41% of all current mortgages are due to mature beyond the person's retirement age, so beyond 66. So we're almost half. So currently half of homeowners will not pay their mortgage off until effectively they retire. And that's quite a surprise. Now, within that, some people will be expecting inheritance, they'll have other plans, etc. But other people will be moving and getting bigger houses as well. But that already at 41%, that's been a significant change. And that's really sort of quite an interesting one to keep an eye on. And actually 13% of mortgages are now maturing when people are past 70. So what we're seeing is people are pushing mortgages further out into where they're going to be in their life, okay? And are they working? Are they retiring? And the one area you can see on the arrears where that's made a difference is sort of round here. Because when you look at the trend behind the arrears data, the one that's interesting is the biggest impacted area are these two, the 56 to 65 and 65 plus. So basically the older age group have got the biggest changes in arrears. And part of that is because the younger population, if they've started to struggle, have been able to get mortgages going interest only, have been able to extend the term of the mortgage as well to help mask some of it. If you're older, you can't do that. If you're in your 60s and still with a mortgage, currently today you are naturally a higher risk than people that aren't because you've taken your mortgage out some time ago and you're still trying to pay it down. So actually, as the interest rates have gone up and they've struggled, their arrears rates are increasing significantly. And you can really see that now in the blue and the orange line. We started to spot the trend sort of last year, and that's one that is increasing. So currently the older population who still have mortgages that they're still paying down are struggling more than the younger population. So that's sort of one to really sort of try and keep an eye on. So alongside that, credit cards. Credit cards is an interesting one because so many people have credit cards. Some people use it to live on. Some people collect points and air miles and use credit cards in all kinds of different ways. So when you then start to look at it as a market and go, okay, what can we actually see going on? Is there anything in this market? Because if people are struggling financially, then taking cash advances out by credit card is one way of surviving. Using the credit card and trying to use another card to pay one card off is another way of being able to manage your finances as well. So credit card data is actually quite interesting to keep an eye on from people's day-to-day lifestyles. And actually what you can see here, this is the arrears rates, and again, this is the roll rates we'll talk about in a second. So first of all, the arrears rates are actually basically down. Okay, so credit card arrears rates across early, so 1 payment, 2 payment, 3 payments, across all of them are actually lower than they have been previously. So people's credit cards are generally performing better, okay? And when you compare that to the chart down here, which is utilizations, well, it's not like utilizations have dropped off. Utilizations are pretty much in line where they have been. They've gone up slightly since the pandemic, but they're generally in their normal area, okay? So actually what we've seen, so for example, at the start of the pandemic, a lot of credit card companies sort of withdrew credit lines. So actually what you got is an overall amount of credit available dropped slightly. That's been changing over the past sort of year or so. So the amount of credit available via credit card is back to levels where it was historically. Utilizations are now back to kind of where we've seen them historically, but arrears rates are actually down slightly. So you can kind of look at that and go, yeah, they are quite flat, so they're not wildly down, but they are slightly lower. They're not going up. That's the main thing. So people, on the face of it, are not using their credit card more than they have been historically to be higher utilized and then getting to arrears doing it. They're kind of not. And the other thing we can see as well, this is the reverse of the graph we looked at for mortgages. This is a roll to better rate. Okay, so this is people going from 1 to 0, 2 to 1, 3 to 2. And again, they're all increasing. They're all going the right way. So more people are going from 1 to 0. More people are going from 2 to 1. So actually, when you look at the credit card behavior, in a market where we've had cost of living pressures, in a market where people have got less money in their bank accounts, in a market where people generally are feeling a little bit worse off, actually, they've still got access to credit. They're still getting less arrears. They're still using it as much as they were before. And if they are getting into arrears, they seem to be recovering out of it better than they have done historically. And that's also on the basis that they can't just go and then remortgage and pay stuff off like they could 15, 20 years ago. You can't do that now. So it's kind of an interesting view, the credit card ones versus the mortgage ones. Mortgages are relatively flat, certain areas struggling with arrears. Credit cards overall tends to look a little bit sort of more healthy. And then a couple of other quick ones to consider is overdraft. Okay, so overdrafts, again, quite flat. There's a tiny increase in them, but not massively. Okay, so the overdrafts are always a good one to have a look at. People are struggling, they'll tend to go into overdrafts more and then come back out of them again, etc. Again, that data is staying relatively flat. It dropped at the start of the pandemic and is now remaining flat, so we aren't seeing massive spikes in overdrafts. Now, part of that could be because the amount of actual overdrafts have been reduced. But actually, when you look at the average utilization, it's remaining where it was before. So even if they are being reduced, people are still only as far into it as they would have been on a bigger overdraft as well. So utilization rates are staying quite flat. And then finally, unsecured loan arrears, again, they're just quite flat. So it goes back to that kind of first graph that we looked at. If you looked at unsecured loans, again, if you're getting into arrears, if you're struggling, if you're finding things challenging out there, the things you stop paying are utilities, your credit card, and your unsecured loans. That's what you're told to focus on. So actually, when you look at these, again, they're also quite flat. So it's not like unsecured loans. People have borrowed way too much, and suddenly they're over-leveraged, and suddenly the arrears are spiking. They're not. They're remaining relatively flat. So again, when you start to look back and you go, okay, you look at affordability checks that companies are doing, you look at due diligence they're doing before they take people on, all of that seems to be flowing through, that even in a challenging market, arrears rates are remaining relatively flat. So one of the challenges that we've had on this is, okay, so generally arrears are down, the market's not quite as bad, slightly different to the headlines. You know, is that because companies are generally, tightening the reins? They're borrowing to less risky people. They're only letting the best through the door. So all this is looking at average scores for customers who have been on book. And we've got it across mortgage challenges, credit card challenges, personal loans, and personal loan challenges. That's what we're trying to look at. But this is really simplified, okay? Because averages, there's a little caveat, averages are always an interesting one to use because they do hide a bit of a multitude of sins. But ultimately, you're still looking for a bit of a pattern. And the pattern's quite straightforward. What's the average score for an individual that's been on book for 6 months, been on book for 12 months, been on book for 3 months, and been on book for 1 month? Now, naturally, the longer that you have a credit account with a business, the more it feeds into your score with stability. So generally, the better impact it can have if you keep paying. Okay, so there is a little caveat, which is the blue line, which is kind of for every customer. However, if companies were tightening their belts and only letting better customers through the door, you would expect to see the newest customers, those on book for only a month, to have some kind of slightly higher average, and maybe be slightly higher than the one for 3 months, and slightly higher, but it's not. It's actually almost a reverse trend, or it's flat. So actually, when you look at some of these downward trends are saying those people on book, all customers, have got a higher average score. Those on for 3 months, which is the green line, are there, and those for a month are there. So actually, these charts actually show, yeah, they're either relatively flat, the scores, or actually going down. So the argument that are companies tightening their belts, are they just lending more? No, not really. Are they only looking for the best customers? Yeah, all companies want the best customers. Absolutely, they do. However, when you look at this metric, you can kind of go, yeah, overall, actually, the group with the lowest average scores are their newer customers. And that's also because in challenging markets, you see that. When you get companies going into growth mode, particularly, for example, in the telco sector, where they want to go out and attract new customers, they're willing to take more risk. And the more risk you take, the lower your average score becomes. So it kind of, it's not completely scientific, but it was just a little bit of a view just to say, actually, that's what we can just see within the scores. So does that actually make a difference in terms of the data? So this was a slide I showed last year, so I'm not going to go through it again. This is all about segmentation for data, and if you're going to start using bureau data to drive collections intelligence. I spoke about how you take data, the layers you feed into it, and then you create outcomes based on that data to see if your data will help you understand your collection strategy and how to engage customers. Okay, so that was a high-level one that we showed last year, because ultimately, if you get your data feeding your model correct, you can understand the position that your customer is in and the chance they're actually going to have to pay. So I wanted to do, sorry, it's a bit of a messy table, but I love tables and I love stats, so I thought I'd share them with you. All this is doing, this is just taking examples of, if you drill into data and you know your data, it can genuinely make a difference to the performance that you're looking at. So this is taken off a sample of very old, very adverse collections portfolio, where, for example, the page rate is 12.4%. That's for any customer paying anything. Okay, and then the table shows you how they paid 10%, 20%, or how much of the balance they actually paid. And all you've got here are different cohorts. So good cohort, bad cohort, middle cohort. Now, the more detail you put in, the smaller your population becomes. Okay, so here, for example, this is customers with an up-to-date mortgage and £1,800 or more financial commitments, and they're not being chased for any other debts. So that's a super prime individual in a very adverse collections portfolio. So your cohort is tiny, not surprisingly. However, they perform exceptionally well. They're performing at 3 times the average of any other customer. So if you can find those and you can pick out those customers, you've got effectively 3 times chances of getting paid. Whereas actually, the reverse of that is, if you take people with 2 or more defaults and 2 or more CCJs and multiple collection searches, it kind of goes the other way. They're 3 times less likely to pay you. So it's just, again, taking the data, using the intelligence and starting to understand, actually, the bigger my cohorts, the more it starts to change. And an interesting one here, this is customers with just active accounts. So this group are the up-to-date or 1 payment in arrears. That's your defaulted population at the bottom. Both are sizable populations. What's interesting is their paid rate. The defaulted group sits in your average population. Your non-defaulted group, early arrears group, have a better chance of paying something. But actually, by the time you get over to this side of the table, what you can see here is the amount they actually pay is very, very similar, which is sort of quite an interesting one, whereas the others actually show you've got much better payment rates based on them. So it's just trying to say that actually, when you start to look at the layers of data, and the one we pulled this from has got 29 rules from 13 characteristics coming into play. So this isn't just a single source of data. This is multiple data sources coming together to go, actually, it can generally help understand your customers. And it's the same with scores. So this is taken from a score that has 54 characteristics and uses 32 points rules to figure out where it's going. And again, you take your score, you basically create a population, high to low, and again, you want to see it performing like this. So your highest scorers are twice as likely to pay something compared to the average, for example. Your lowest are 3 times less likely. So what you're trying to do is trying to use the data to be able to go, if you position it correctly and you're using your data intelligently and you're writing your rules appropriately, you can find your cohorts, you can create your population splits to then go, right, now I know this about you, how am I going to engage you? Am I going to use a digital engagement? Am I going to use a standard letter? Am I going to use a phone call? What am I going to say? And am I going to try and use all of the intelligence that sits around it? So you'll have data suppliers out there. You'll have bureau suppliers. There's a lot of data. You've generally got over 1 billion data points sitting within each of the bureaus. You then have the ability to take that look at individuals. You can convert it into data around credit card behavior. You can look at people's affordability. You can look at their collections. You can look at their sort of positions, for example, around fraud and affordability. So ultimately, there's a lot of information. And all you're trying to do is create models and use data to take all of this intelligence and turn it into something meaningful. And if you can do that, this is what you can then start to see. So this is taken from some samples that we did recently, working with clients across multiple portfolios. And the kind of things that you can see, for example, at the moment, across the group, of those people in what we'd call the self-cure, the best population, they had £45 million of balances that have missed a single payment. So those people should be your light touch. They should be digital. You should be reaching out and engaging them. But also, for example, here, they had a defaulted population worth £56.8 million in balances that were showing with a high propensity to pay elsewhere. Now, when you look at the model and you see how they perform, generally speaking, you're expecting a collections rate of around about 13%. And that's a generic rate. That's without bespoking it to any of your own company needs. So there's a group of people who have got defaults sitting in collections portfolios where the collections rate should be around about 13 to 15%. So, for example, if you're selling it for less than that, then you need to know, because you should be selling it for more than that, or at least that, because really, if not, you should be collecting it. And this is the kind of things that companies aren't always aware of till you drill into the data. That will not pay group of £52 million in their defaulted portfolio. That is your forward flow debt sale. That's the stuff you're sort of getting rid of. New addresses. Now, not surprisingly, when a default is registered and people move on, you then get new addresses, but they still owe money. So here, £60 million of debt sitting in a new address pot saying, we know where these people are. They still owe you money, and we know where they are. Now, again, you look historically at how that group will perform. It's around about the 7% if you can re-establish contact. So all of this sits within these data, and the same here. This is an early group. This is your one missed payment where there's a new address. Balance is a lot smaller, but within a traditional portfolio, generally speaking, the movers rate is about 5%. So again, track your portfolios, monitor them, make sure you know where your customers are, because then as soon as they miss a payment, you can get hold of them at the correct address. You're now not chasing at the old address, and time can be critical for that. So we just thought we'd give you a bit of an overview, talk around sort of the position the economy's in, what we think's been going on with it over the past year, how that's feeding into some of the trends, particularly around the mortgage market and some of the challenges in the mortgage market, specifically for those in later stage arrears and the elderly population as well, and how they are being impacted. Discussion around the credit card market, what we can see in the credit card market, and actually the fact it's relatively benign at the moment, and then some examples of how you can use the data. And if you get the data correct and you understand your customers and you know who you're talking to and how you're going to position what you want to say to them, that allows you to start thinking about how can we proactively reach out to these customers in early stage arrears before they get too far down the line. And if we do it proactively, what are we going to say to them? Are we even going to go pre-arrears and create messaging around budgeting and affordability tools, for example? Or what's the best way of engaging them? Where am I going to engage them? And if I know that, then actually I understand the position you're in. I can change my messaging to show empathy. I can engage you to go, I kind of understand where you're struggling and how you're struggling. And because of that, I can treat you in a way that you feel is going to be best for me to treat you. And if I treat you properly, I'll get some brand loyalty out of you. And much as you're in arrears now, that'll change. You'll get a new job, life will move on, and actually then I can keep you on board as a customer, and that keeps you engaged. And if you're engaged, you can get the correct payment plans put in place, because the correct payment plans in place are the critical part to maintaining the relationship. Some of that data we showed, when you look at people in financial distress, their recovery rate is always awful. However, their contact rate is normally not too bad if you get into them early. And the fact they want to pay something is also normally quite good. The problem with people in financial distress is what they want to do and what they're capable of doing are two different things. So understanding their position from early days allows you to drive the correct engagement strategy and the correct payment plans to keep them on board, not having payment plans breaking, and sort of buying brand loyalty. So hopefully you found that useful as a way to start the day for you today. Bit of an overview of those parts and any questions that we can answer. Otherwise, I shall speak to you over lunch or as the day progresses.
Right, I'm told we have questions.
They're just blank, that's it.
Well, I've got questions. Oh, no.
Somebody's brave.
Well done, whoever you are.
Should show a picture of them typing.
Sorry?
Should show a picture of them typing on screen.
All right, I'm going to ask my question.
Okay.
So I assume you're coming back next year, but what do you think the data you've talked about, where do you think that might fluctuate in comparison to other non-UK markets? Do you think there's going to be similar trends across Europe, for example?
Sorry, to say for non-UK markets?
Yes.
So as in what's happening abroad and other areas, etc. That's a good question. One we don't massively look at, to be honest. We've had a lot of discussions around that recently. You know, how much interest is there in overseas markets, particularly people that actually move abroad? What can we do with them? How can we engage them? Different countries have very different rules around the data that can be used and can be shared and made in decisioning. So, for example, Spain has negative data, not the positive data. So... Did you find? Yeah, I did. We have a plan. So overseas markets are hard, and obviously the impact that's going to have on the UK. I think if you look globally at the moment, yeah, there are definitely a few challenges which could flow through to the UK. I suppose my only caveat on that is really, I think this year is going to be massively focused in the UK on the election, the potential changes, and if Labour come in, what rules there are going to be that are going to differ to where we are now. So it's a slightly hard one to gauge how external factors will impact the UK.
Cool. We'll leave the important question to last.
Yeah.
But how are you considering the inclusion of BNPL into your data?
Yeah, so it is absolutely being considered, it's being looked at, but the key thing is that level of data does need to be kept separate from the key bureau data and be used alongside it. Because people going out doing the buy now, pay later is obviously the companies that position it do so as a tool to enable sales. So you get to the cash till, you now are going to buy 3 things instead of 1 spread over a period of time. And you can do that at 5 or 6 shops in a single day. So if you take those 5 or 6 applications that have taken place and you pile them into the bureau data, it will send scores haywire and put them all over the place. So the buy now, pay later data is going to be very useful and will be a key piece of data to have going forward, but sitting outside of core bureau until it can be sort of fed into it over a prolonged period of time, and then scores built alongside and effectively wrapping it up with the bureau data, but recognizing the power it has. So that is absolutely something that all of the bureaus are looking at different levels, different areas, how it can feed into scores and characteristics and then be used in decisioning.
Excellent. How does this data look for businesses rather than personal?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I think if you, for example, if you look at insolvencies for businesses, there's actually been quite a big increase in business insolvencies over the past year compared to personal. However, there has also been a big increase in company registrations that have been going on as well. So actually, the commercial market, as is often the case, has a lot more fluctuations that are going on. A lot of people set up new companies, a lot of new companies fail, a lot of companies re-phoenix. And when you look at average scores and trends across commercial bureaus, again, they're relatively flat. You aren't seeing massive changes, you aren't seeing huge risk parameters. Some companies are getting a bit more over-leveraged than others in certain sectors, but there aren't, again, big swings of data. One little thing which is happening this year, which could make a difference, believe it or not, if you set a company up, the company's house did no checking on that at all. They didn't check you existed, they didn't check you as a director, they didn't check the name of your company, they just let you set it up, and that was it. So how many companies there are on Companies House and in the system which are either fake or being used for not necessarily the correct purpose is a bit of an unknown. As of this year, Companies House have got to change that. So there are now projects that they've actually got to validate what is coming through the system and what is being registered. And that, particularly this year and into next year, could have a significant impact because there's already projects in flight for Companies House to start looking at this data and going, actually, how many of these companies don't even exist? How many of these companies are set up by fraudsters? And that's going to start to flow through over the next sort of 8 to 12 months.
Should we see? Is there anyone in the audience who wants to ask a question with the catch box, just to test Ben's throwing skills before I answer more of these? No hands, good. Excellent. Which one do you want? Should we go? We'll go for the top one again. Even though there are almost 1 million jobs advertised, is it simply the salary offering not enough to sustain all outgoings? So
yeah, within reason, absolutely. Very much so. You know, there are people doing multiple jobs. For example, if you look at the jobs advertised, lots with Amazon and DBD and cleaning and stuff, people don't necessarily jobs people want to do. There is a couple of things that are on the go. See, one, there is a group of the population that effectively retired in COVID and haven't come back out of retirement because they basically don't want to. And that's left a bit of a gap, particularly in the kind of 55 plus age group. And that's where some of the jobs are sitting. That's why part of the national insurance change yesterday is around trying to get some of the older people maybe sort of back into work. So that's one of the challenges. But no, I think that's a very fair point, which is if you just look at the cost of living challenges versus salaries, there was a massive lag. Now, throughout 2023, that changed, and certainly the back quarter of 23, salaries were actually rising faster than inflation was, so it had overtaken it for the first time. But I think that is a very fair assessment just to say at the moment, part of the challenges are people are just not quite earning enough. However, they're staying afloat, and that's the key thing. It goes back to unemployment is not spiking and going up, and therefore arrears are really taking off. More people are just managing, they're getting by, and I think everyone's hoping that the next year, 18 months, 2 years, we'll see a bit of a change and things will just feel a bit better.
Excellent. I'll take one more and then we can probably send you some of these and you'll be around for the rest of the day, won't you? And we'll make sure they get answered. So where are we now? So excellent presentation, Dennis, I concur. What stats do you have on early engagement regarding ongoing contact success when dealing with customers in arrears? Thank you.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because that early engagement, that's more about the messaging. And I think it's hard to have actual stats if you do this many people will respond. But it's more about if you can get it right early doors. One of the challenges that a lot of companies have is a very linear collections process. So they'll go, right, we're always going to send 2 letters and make 3 phone calls without understanding the position the person is in. So actually, if you're taking data, if you have a data feed you are taking in life for that customer before they're in any kind of arrears, if you know the position that they're in, you can actually proactively reach out to them before they're even in arrears. And they might contact you through your app, for example. They may contact you through an inbound call. You may decide to outbound call. You may have a digital strategy. What that does is that maintains contact. Because by the time customers start getting into arrears and then sustained arrears, you're not the only company they owe money to. So you're in a position, people are being chased generally by 3, 4, 5, 6 companies and therefore are now not wanting to contact anybody. So establishing contact and maintaining contact early on actually helps their position because it stops them getting further into arrears with yourselves and therefore owing you more money. So you're sort of doing more with them. But what you can also do with those data elements is use them to drive different strategies, because the reverse of that is if you have customers that are higher risk and just aren't going to pay, and you can see it in the data. Again, you can't not do anything, but don't waste your time on strategies with them. Get your CCJ, get it issued, basically, get them defaulted, and effectively either forward flow sell them or kind of move them on. Because what you're trying to do is create the resource to support the people that need the most amount of support. So if you get it right and you get your digital strategy correct and you've got your early engagement for people wanting to engage that way, you're taking those that don't want to engage and moving them out in a different route. What that ultimately means is you can then focus on your customers that do need focusing on. Okay, so there aren't actual stats on that early piece, but it does flow through in the data, and particularly payment rates when you have good customers versus bad customers.
Cool. I think I pressed the button there, sorry.
That's right.
Thank you, Dennis, that was excellent.
Right.
Cool. Hopefully you'll be back next year.